It's been several months since the release of The Acolyte, and it's safe to say that the series has been one of the most polarizing works that Star Wars has ever seen. With claims of fan bombing, too much wokeness, and episodes full of cringe, it's clear that many Star Wars fans really hated the series. Yet at the same time, many fans have emphatically defended it, even creating a petition with more than 81,000 signatures demanding a Season 2. Since The Last Jedi in 2017, the polarization between fans couldn't be greater. But what really went wrong and right with The Acolyte? And what exactly is it about the series that has made fans get so fired up? As longtime Star Wars fans and creators of TrueSWFans.com, we've created a new and specialized rating system aimed at answering exactly that.
Before we dive into the score, we need to talk a little about what's been going on with Star Wars as a whole. At its core, Star Wars contains fundamental bedrock elements, all of which you can see in the original trilogy and which are frequently seen in the prequels. Quality storytelling, character self-development, growing friendships, and the mysteries of the Force are just a few of these key elements. Fans know this. We think that's part of why many love the saga so much. It's our theory that the polarization seen in The Acolyte and other Star Wars media has come about at least in part because many fans connect with these elements, while others, even film critics, aren't necessarily concerned about them at all. And while some reactions regarding The Acolyte and other media have been unkind or even hurtful, our goal is to look at Star Wars material professionally and respectfully, acknowledging the hard work of many talented people while also critiquing it to give an honest fan score. And the best part is, if you're a fan who wants to be heard and help score The Acolyte in a professional way, keep watching and we'll show you how you can.
In order to really determine what happened to The Acolyte, we started by looking where everyone else looks, places like Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb. But as you've probably heard, review bombing seems to have dramatically skewed these scores, at least some of them. On Rotten Tomatoes, the Acolyte audience score was already at 48% several hours before the show had even premiered on Disney+. And, after airing for only 2 weeks with 3 episodes released, The Acolyte had 10,000 general audience reviews, yet Ahsoka only had half that number at 5,000 despite being out for months. At the same time, the 3rd season of The Mandalorian only had a quarter that number of reviews, and the highly acclaimed Andor also had only half as many. These numbers heavily imply that review bombing did take place. So, knowing that these audience scores weren't likely accurate, we knew we needed another way to score The Acolyte, a method that really gets at the heart of the polarization we talked about.
So welcome the General Audience Functional Fan Index, or more affectionately, the GAFFI Score, a hybrid score that uses both general audience polling and fan-based scores of itemized criteria to take a closer look at the quality of Star Wars media. First, the score looks at 3 major audience polls: IMDb, Rotten Tomatoes, and Metacritic. If any of the scores shows likelihood of review bombing, then that score is removed. The remaining scores are then averaged and compared against a fan-based rating. The idea for a fan-based rating really came as inspiration when watching the Olympic gymnastics competitions. In these competitions, athletes get a score based on 2 different aspects. The first is the move itself and how difficult it is to perform. But in the second piece, they receive an execution score on how well they actually performed or executed those moves. Until now, ratings for Star Wars have really looked at the overall move, but focused less on individual executions. Instead, the GAFFI score looks at overall scoring and execution and combines them together. This way you have a score that is fair to the public and fans.
So how is the execution score actually created? Just like a panel of judges, knowledgeable fans rate the top 5 plot lines of the series as well as the worst 5, both the really good and the really bad of what fans and media are saying stood out in The Acolyte. After poring through Reddit, Screen Rant, YouTube, and the rest of the internet, we identified the top 5 and worst 5 moments. We then carefully scored them, as well as 3 universal categories, and combined their average score to then combine with the general audience scores mentioned and create the GAFFI score. Of course, the score right now is just from the 2 of us, but the good news, like we mentioned, is that if you want to be a part of the fan score, you can.
If you want your voice heard, you can find the link to the application on TrueSWFans.com in the show notes below. You'll be asked to fill out some basic info about your passion for Star Wars and a few questions that tell us more about your Star Wars preferences. We'll also ask you to take a quiz to check your Star Wars knowledge. And to thank those who show dedication by submitting ratings over time, we plan to award Star Wars merchandise, things like lightsabers, apparel, and even more.
So now let's dive in and see how the Acolyte scored. On IMDb, the series scored 4.1 out of 10, while Metacritic landed a 3.2 out of 10, and Rotten Tomatoes' equivalent was 1.8. However, as mentioned, it looks pretty clear that the Rotten Tomatoes score was review bombed. For the same reasons, Metacritic also looks review bombed. IMDb, however, doesn't follow this pattern. The number of votes is higher for the other series that have been out longer as compared to The Acolyte, what we would expect. Interestingly, IMDb also has the highest audience score of the three. So, we threw out the scores for Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes, only keeping IMDb's score of 4.1. For the GAFFI scoring system, whenever general audience scores are not included due to concern for review bombing, the score will be reported with the dagger symbol to show that it had to be modified to account for this problem. This is not too unlike the Tusken Raider GAFFI stick that the score is kinda named after.
To get the fan execution score, let's now jump in and look at each of the points and how we rated them. We have 5 different positive points, and the first of those, the Acolyte, involves several elements of mystery and suspense as the Jedi investigate a series of murders. So the setting of the Acolyte plays on a new type of storytelling experience for the Star Wars genre. We see in the opening scene a standoff between Master Indara and May, in which this mysterious new character, May, is able to best the Jedi Master. Historically, action and suspense have always been main staples of Star Wars, but this investigation-like style of the Acolyte was a new take on the Star Wars storytelling and has a lot of potential to attract viewers and keep them hooked. Mystery is traditionally riddled with twists and breakthroughs that leave room for great viewer satisfaction as they are pleasantly surprised. And given that the Star Wars writing world is so huge, the possibilities to develop a compelling story are near endless, making this genre of mystery have a lot of potential in the Star Wars world. So while not vastly different than some other Star Wars works, it was a good attempt that hooked viewers, and the new format was kind of refreshing, so I gave it a 6 out of 10.
I also gave it a rating of good, or 6 out of 10. The next point is, new philosophies and skills, including Chimere's unique and unexpected dueling style, reinforce the strength of Sith Lords throughout Star Wars history. The Acolyte did a nice job depicting a powerful Sith Lord. In Episode 5, Night, we see him in action, quickly disarming and killing an entire force of Jedi, even using a Shoto lightsaber. With regard to his fighting, Yord also describes the Sith's masterful fighting style, saying, quote, "He gets inside your head, and he stays there." This new description of how Sith can exert their power is one that shows how they have more than physical prowess in their abilities and opens up a lot of interesting questions. Not only that, but Chimere doesn't fight fair like Jedi, but instead uses even gruesome techniques to win, such as snapping Yord's head without strict lightsaber engagement. His pursuit of finding a Sith pupil, reminiscent of the Rule of Two, also is interesting, and like Palpatine, he uses charisma to be unsuspecting and therefore deadly. In addition, the allusions to Darth Plagueis, or some other powerful Sith Lord hiding in the dark, made the lore of Sith even more awesome during the series. The Acolyte as a whole builds on the power and lore of Sith in a meaningful way, which is why I rated its positive impact as very good, or 8 out of 10.
I agree with all of those points too, and just voted a little bit lower at good, or 6 out of 10. The next positive point is how the series depicts the Republic and Jedi Order in a unique, unprecedented era with many new characters. With Star Wars, we're all familiar that there's a long history of introducing new time eras. The Old Republic, for example, then we also have the Republic era, the Clone Wars, the Imperial era, and then the New Republic era, and First Order. In all these eras, though, we do see that one of the biggest gaps in time of the Star Wars galaxy is between the Old Republic and the Republic era. There have been an increasing number of references to what the Jedi Order looked like before Episode 1. For example, depictions of the Trade Federation working with covert Sith influences suggest that the Jedi Order, even during these episodes, was not truly at its height of flourishing. And in Episode 2, we have the famous line from Mace Windu speaking to politicians, saying that, as Jedi, we're keepers of the peace, not soldiers. But shortly thereafter, we began to see the Jedi primarily cast in the light as soldiers via their engagement as generals and leaders in the Clone Wars. All of this leads to an interest from the fans to better understand what it means to see the Jedi as keepers of the peace during this newly introduced era of the High Republic. While the argument for how well this era is being depicted is up for debate and other discussions, The introduction of this era is in line with past Star Wars works and fills an interesting gap in time, so I rated it 6 out of 10, or good.
And I rated it fair, or 4 out of 10.
The next other positive point that we want to talk about was the identity of the mysterious Sith Lord directing May being unexpectedly revealed as someone May never would have suspected. Star Wars has a big history of surprising twists and big reveals. Few examples, the biggest of course being when Darth Vader revealed himself as Luke's father in The Empire Strikes Back. Other examples being Anakin fulfilling the role as Darth Vader during Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, Chancellor Palpatine being discovered as the Sith Lord that we've been looking for. The series began by compelling the audience to believe that May was the mastermind or lead suspect of why Jedi were mysteriously showing up dead. New clues come along, though, as we hear May explaining to the stranger, who is disguised as an apothecary or chemist-like character, as she explained to him the difficulty of her task. This led us to understand as viewers that maybe May was not the mastermind, in fact. Kilnaka's death then leads to the reveal of Kymir as the stranger or the Sith Lord that was the mastermind we were wondering that may have been referring to. And then even later on, we see a glimpse of another individual who has been theorized to be Darth Plagueis, perhaps one of the largest reveals of the series. The intentions of having more lore and reveals definitely is compelling to viewers. Other parts of the series may have debilitated the success of these intentions, but they were impactful in adding to the story and the show as a whole, and for that reason I gave this 6 out of 10.
I agree. I've also given it a score of good, or 6 out of 10. The next point is, via Kymir's helmet, Cortosis is visually introduced into canon as a rare and lightsaber-resistant metal in the galaxy. Cortosis has been around for a long time. In Legends, it was used in Shadow Trooper armor and also in C-B3 Cortosis battle droids from the Clone Wars. In canon, Anakin and Thrawn discover it being used by separatists on the planet Mokivij in the book Thrawn Alliances to create a B-2 super battle droid impervious to lightsabers. We learn via Thrawn's deductions that Cortosis has a high energy absorption rate and high transmission coefficients, which are why it can block lightsabers and even cause them to short out. Despite this, the book also explains that Cortosis was actually quite soft and therefore relatively useless until someone figured out how to weave it into a protective matrix. The Acolyte reveals that while most of the galaxy didn't know how to use Cortosis before the Clone War, these dangerous Sith Lords in hiding had already figured it out, which raises the question of what other technologies they might have beaten the Republic to. While it is a good new reveal, though, its positive impact on the storytelling, in my opinion, wasn't that strong, so I rated it as fair, or 4 out of 10.
I agree, I also rated it 4 out of 10.
Now let's take a look at the worst 5 plot arcs of the series. The first is, Osha and May are raised by a new cult-like coven of Force witches on Brendok who perform chants and rituals in the Force. A large backlash was seen when Episode 3, Night, introduced a coven of witches. Witches have existed in Star Wars for a while now, such as the Dathomirian witches, to which Morgan Elsbeth, Mother Talzin, and others belong, and their effect on Star Wars was somewhat mixed when depicted in animation. The story of strange and eerie witches has been played upon far too much, and already wasn't really providing a positive impact or contribution to Star Wars. Now, in live action, these new witches are portrayed in an almost psychotic way, with overly passionate chanting and rhythmic movements that appear frenzied and detract from the story by making it feel less serious and almost comedic. Both fans and non-fans have expressed their contempt for these scenes, which really hurt the Acolyte, for which I've rated the negative impact as severe, or 0 out of 10.
I agree, I also rated this 0 out of 10. It was a very severe impact, for sure. The next negative point that we want to talk about is how the viewer's attachment to the Acolyte was severely debilitated through elimination of respected characters, such as Sol, Osha, and May, as a consequence of these characters having contradicting actions and poor communication styles. One of the major criticisms that the Acolyte received was regarding its character development. While some argue that Star Wars has a history of pulling punches and not killing off anyone of significance or casting them in a bad light, many have argued conversely that the Acolyte lost viewer interest through poor writing that involved vague, unrealistic communication between characters, and writing that killed off all characters that were of any interest to the viewers. There are plenty of examples that display these later sentiments. For example, the Jedi Yord and Jeki were both cast as kind of self-righteous Jedi initially, who had some humility to learn from Jedi Master Sol or to show some type of compassion for Osha, but both of these characters were killed off shortly after we saw any change in their character. Soul is casted as a Jedi who genuinely cares for the well-being of others. He has many emotional scenes of reflection and grief for Osha and May, and we see clearly in battle that he's a skilled Jedi, and he is also very insightful. Viewers began to cling to him as the only source of a decent human being, but the finale quickly crushed those feelings as he's revealed to be deceitful and gets killed shortly after. Master Indara is also seen as self-righteous and overly confident, but respected by teammates and her squad of Jedi. For example, we see in the opening episode that she doesn't seek combat with May and instead tries to heal May's emotional wounds. Despite any redemptive value in her character, she is also killed, and additionally, her inability to communicate with the Jedi squad leads to her ultimate failure of that mission. Many viewers were excited by the prospect of the first true example of a Wookiee Jedi that we have in the form of Kelnaka. He too is also found to be dead shortly after his introduction, and the only scene of him that we find in combat, which was highly anticipated, was him cast as a villain during the raid of the Witch Coven. Through all these examples, it is clear that poor writing via use of vague and unrealistic miscommunications between characters was heavily relied upon to force the characters and story to do things that didn't make sense, including May burning down the Coven. Writing from this is seen as inconsistent, sloppy, and contradicts itself and forces characters to lose their credibility. Because of all of this, I gave this a severe impact on the show, or 0 out of 10 points.
I agree. I gave it also a severe or 0 out of 10 points. The next point is the Jedi Order and many of its members are depicted as deceitful, manipulative, and selfish. In Star Wars, Jedi have generally been seen as cool-headed warriors, but also keepers of the peace. And while a few of the Jedi in the series start out as interesting and skilled in the Force, it's hard to list any Jedi by the end that isn't dead, viewed as despicable, or both. Throughout the series, Jedi Master Rove Ernesto was stiff and cranky, and also afraid and embarrassed to meet with Senator Rey in court. More importantly, she has a lightsaber whip, and linking this with the scars on Chimere's back, who was her apprentice, it strongly appears that she may have whipped him. Jedi never beat or torture anyone, yet the Acolyte seems to suggest otherwise, at least casting a very dark shadow on Vernestra Rove. In turn, Mog, who was an assistant to Vernestra in his interactions with her, is frequently shown as scoffing and incompetent. Torben, while on Brendok, is, quote, sick of eating Nuna legs and just wants to go home to Coruscant. He's disrespectful to Master Indara and rushes after the Coven as soon as he realizes it will help him get back to Coruscant, stating, "This is our ticket home." He leaves against direct orders, and this decision serves as the catalyst to spark the deaths of the entire Witch Coven and the Jedi's decision to manipulate and lie to Osha and the Jedi Council. Most importantly, though, Soul, who appears as the only honest and compassionate Jedi, as we've mentioned previously, turns out to be a liar and the murderer of Osha's mother. At the end of the series, there isn't a single Jedi that the viewers can find to really support, and the Jedi are turned from heroes into villains. For these reasons, I've said that the negative impact on the series was severe, or 0 out of 10.
I agree entirely. I also gave this a 0 out of 10. The next negative point we wanted to talk about was Osha and May being purportedly created through a vergence in the Force, similar to Anakin Skywalker's origins. While Mothers Coral and Anastasia are arguing about letting Osha and May be tested by the Jedi in the third episode, Night, Coral states, "I carried them," while Anastasia retorts, "I created them." Most have taken this to mean that somehow Anastasia created the twins through the Force, hurting the unique origins of Anakin as the Chosen One because he was thought to be the only one conceived of the Force. This has provoked mixed responses from fans, some feeling that it strongly contradicts canon, while others feel that it does not. Fans who don't like it seem to say, how chosen can Anakin be if his whole story is actually very repeatable? In carefully reviewing the dialogue, however, it may actually be that the twins were not directly born through the Force. In the 7th episode, Choice, Torben states their symbionts are identical, causing Master Indara to suppose it possible, saying, maybe by tapping into a power dense enough to split one consciousness into two bodies. Dathomirian witches were already established in canon to conceive through asexual reproduction, as we read in Trisha Barr's book, The Dark Side. Although the Night Sisters did not need males to procreate, the brothers would have become extinct if they had not agreed to bear Zabrak children. Coral is of course a Zabrak witch, so not unlike the Dathomirian females. She could have conceived a child through asexual reproduction, but the key is that Anastasia used the Force to split that child into twins, one consciousness split into two bodies. If this is the case, then Osha and May were truly conceived of the Force the way Anakin was, and the legacy of the Chosen One is not contradicted at all. So, while the details of the story indicate a much more plausible and acceptable explanation of Osha and May, the face value of their origin still has caused so much discontent and ambiguity as to the intentions of the writers that I gave this a 2 out of 10, or quite a lot of a negative impact.
And I gave it a little negative impact just because of the potential theory, or 6 out of 10. The next point is the series shows Kymir as a more compassionate and sensual Sith Lord, including a scene of Kymir naked in front of Osha. After the stranger captures Osha on Kofar and takes her to his mysterious base on another planet, a scene depicts Osha viewing him naked after he has bathed, portraying him in a sensual way not seen before with Sith Lords. In addition, the two are seen at the end of the series holding hands and looking out at the horizon, a scene strongly suggestive of romantic interest. Yet the two barely had enough interaction in the series to know each other, let alone have romantic ties. Moreover, having compassion for others through romantic interests weakens the selfish, power-hungry complex that is fundamental to Sith character. In Legends, we read in the Knights of the Old Republic the Code of the Sith. Given these contradictions, I rated the negative impact as somewhat, or 4 out of 10.
I also gave it somewhat, or 4 out of 10.
Lastly, there are 3 other general pieces that make up the execution score that we should talk about. These 3 are the same for every Star Wars series and were chosen because they really embrace what Star Wars at its core means. They are storytelling quality, character development, and continuity.
So the first one, storytelling quality, we wanted to look at the traditional storytelling arc, or epic, which involved the following elements: exposition, initial incident, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution, and tying up any loose ends. The Acolyte appears to follow the traditional storytelling arc fairly well, for better or for worse. Exposition and initial incident of May and Master Indara are compelling and stir up enough questions in the audience's mind that viewers have a reason to continue with the story. The following action sets the room for more to occur, especially with the union of Osha and Kymir, reveal of a mystery Sith who may be Darth Plagueis, and the reveal of Yoda. That being said, it was also not very conclusive. We pretty much ended up back where we started, but just switching out Osha and May and having killed off a lot of people in the meantime. For the ambiguity and plot holes, I rated this as a 2 out of 10.
I also rated it as a 2 out of 10. The next is character development. Sol, Osha, May, and the Sith Stranger probably have the most character development throughout the story. On the other hand, several characters that showed promising development, such as Jeki and Yord, were killed just when we start to feel like we're connecting with them. And May's character, which is crucial to the series, is perhaps what hurt it the most. Her development is chaotic, and you can't tell what she wants. At first, she seems dead set on killing the Jedi and honoring her Sith Master, but this changes as she tries to betray the Sith Lord. At times, she shows deference to her sister, Osha, while at other times she appears to not care about her sister at all. As a whole, she's very indecisive, and it's as if she really has no direction or purpose at all. And though Sol's character was making out to be quite promising, as already discussed, his hopeful character as a protagonist that we could connect with and like was shattered when he was portrayed as the worst villain of them all. I've therefore rated character development as poor, or 2 out of 10.
And I also rated it similarly as very poor, or 0 out of 10. The final point of general execution is continuity. Like most new Star Wars material, the Acolyte had multiple contradictions to current canon, though some were certainly more significant than others. The 2 largest have already been addressed in detail. Making the Jedi appear largely like villains is a huge contradiction in Star Wars, and quite inconsistent with existing canon, and even what fundamentally defines Star Wars. And the other being issues with the potential conception of Osha and May through the Force. A third, also important issue is that the Sith risked exposure long before the Phantom Menace. Some have criticized the Ki-Adi-Mundi was present and learned of May having unique training despite saying in the Phantom Menace, the Sith have been extinct for over a millennium. A careful examination, though, reveals that there were no survivors present from when Kymir declared himself a Sith that could have raised the alarms in the Jedi Council, except Osha. In addition, the concept of an Acolyte is new, but doesn't necessarily contradict canon. Some new things the Acolyte adds to canon that are interesting include, we now know Miralins lived for centuries, and we also had the introduction of Wookiee and Zygerian Jedi. For all of this, I gave the continuity a score of neutral, or 4 out of 10.
And I gave it fair, or 6 out of 10. Overall, our initial fan execution score averaged at 3.3 out of 10, and combining this with our general audience score of 4.1, the GAFFI score comes out to be 3.7 out of 10. As a whole, with its elements of mystery murders, Sith in the shadows, and possible new and interesting ways of looking at the Force, The Acolyte had a lot of great potential. Unfortunately, poor dialogue and plot writing, including poor character development and the killing off of several characters, crippled the series. Both The Acolyte's general audience score of 4.1 and its fan execution score of 3.3 support that overall, the series was unfortunately not very good. And again, whether you agree or disagree, we hope you'll join our fan critics in rating The Acolyte. Stay tuned for additional videos. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.